When you were little, did you ever sit down with your grandpa and he'd tell you some stories about when he was a kid? Well, my grandkids call me Pawpaw. And so in our family, they're Pawpaw stories. And one of my favorite things when I was a kid, and if you were a kid, if you're as old as I am, you were a kid in the 50s, you enjoyed the same thing that I did. Nobody wore seat belts back in the 50s. And when you're a kid, you could free roam all over the car. There were no car seats, there were no airbags, there were none of this, safety stuff. People just had to drive responsibly and had to realize that everybody was just floating around the car. My mother wouldn't wear a dress, wouldn't wear a seatbelt if she'd had one, because she said it would wrinkle her dress. And so that's where that goes. But anyway, as a kid, I used to run around the car, and when every now and then my folks would come up to the mountains, and I'd get to ride along a road similar to this. Usually it was on the Blue Ridge Parkway, but my view out the window would be like the view that hopefully you have right now. I'd have my little face pressed up against the window, and my dad would have to be careful and watch where he's driving. And I'd just be looking all over the place and looking out over the guardrails and looking at the beautiful mountains and the trees, and just having a great time. Sometimes I'd climb up front and get my dad's lap and help him drive, and sometimes go sit on my mom's lap, and sometimes I'd just be roaming the back seat. If you were a kid from that era, you would have climbed up in the little shelf behind the rear seat and kind of got between the rear window and that shelf, and it was usually really warm there. The sun was usually coming through, and you could just lay there and look straight up at the sky as you went along. And it was really special. I look back on that now, people say, oh, that's so irresponsible. Oh, you could have gotten killed. What were your parents thinking? Well, my parents, as I said, were thinking, I'm going to drive responsibly. I'm not going to get in an accident. And we didn't. My father never got in an accident driving with me in the car, or my sister for that matter, because he was careful, very careful. But, anything can happen. And I'm not saying we shouldn't wear seatbelts now, that we shouldn't strap our grandkids in. My grandkids never go anywhere unless they're strapped in. The little ones in the car seat, and the bigger on the booster, and then the biggest ones of all on the regular seatbelt. But the thing is, we didn't worry about it all that much. It wasn't such a big mantra back then. Things were just a little different. We what did you do when you went out of the house? My mother would always throw me out of the house, after breakfast, and say, come back at lunchtime. And she'd throw me out in the backyard, and I could roam the neighborhood or stay in the backyard. And you know what we played with? Now, yes, we had basketballs and baseballs and footballs and stuff like that. But when you're by yourself, it's kind of hard to do any of that. So what do you play with? You play with a rock. You play with a stick. You played with mud clods, were my personal favorite. My dad had a little garden that he always grew, and he never really got much out of it. The squirrels kind of would come and birds would take everything that he'd try to grow. But you could always count on his garden for mud clods, just perfect mud clods about the size of my little fist at that time. And the neighborhood kids, their dads had gardens, and we'd have mud clod fights. And the only thing that wasn't fair was throwing a mud clod that had a rock in it. That was against the rules. But other than that, mud would fly, and we'd get in all kinds of trouble. But yeah, that's the way it was back then. Like I said, people, you can say there were different times, and there were. The little neighborhood that I grew up in, I don't think any of the moms worked. So moms were home all day. So, you're 5 or 6 years old, they'd throw you out the back door, and you could roam the neighborhood, like I said, and there were 1,000 eyes on you the whole time you were out there. But it was unobtrusive. It wasn't somebody standing right beside you, or you weren't in a designated safe area playground with a fence around it. My God, nobody would play in a playground that had a fence around it. What fun was that? You can't run around, you can't have fun and be spontaneous, and do stuff like that. But you know, that's just the way it is. But you know, we had dangerous toys to play on. We had rope swings. We had that twirly thing that was made out of steel that you could get up to about 1,000 miles an hour and fling kids off in all directions. We had something called the monkey bars, solid steel rectangles going up maybe 10 feet high that you'd hang on and fall down from and break your arm, break your leg, you know, whatever. One of my favorite comedians has a line. He says, you know, we didn't have all this safe stuff back there. The unlucky kids, they didn't make it. But you know, I can't remember a single kid. I remember one kid in our whole neighborhood that broke his arm playing on the monkey bars. Just one. We didn't lose a kid in the neighborhood. And maybe, is that typical? Is that typical from your neighborhood? I don't know. But I tell these stories to my grandkids and they cannot believe, their jaws just drop open. They just can't believe it. And say, Papa, look, did you keep track, have to text your mama on the phone all the time to let her know you were okay? And I said, told them we didn't have phones that you could take with you. We didn't have texting. We didn't have any of that. We had a phone that was on a wall with a cord. In fact, it was in the kitchen, and it had a cord about 30 feet long that you could stretch all through the house when you talked on it. My grandmother was on a party line in the little town she lived in, and you'd pick up the phone and have to see if anybody else was already talking. And in case you people don't know what a party line is, I highly suggest Wikipedia, but I'll do my best. A party line was just an open line shared by more than one family, and you had to take turns. You had a special ring. If you say somebody wanted to call you, your phone might go ring, 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 ring. You know, and if it did anything else, if it just went ring, ring, you knew that wasn't for you and you didn't answer it. But yeah, I mean, we used to carry, I forget what it was. What was it, a dime for a payphone? You know, if you wanted to be on the safe side, you carry a dime with you so that, you know, if you did get lost somewhere, you find a payphone. Payphones were everywhere. You know, I mean, literally, they were everywhere. And any mom would let you use their phone. In fact, any mom probably already knew your phone number. But whole different animal than today. You know, was it better? I think in a lot of ways it was. You know, I played outside my whole childhood. You know, I mean, my grandkids spend at least half their time inside on their video games, watching movies, stuff like that. Is it bad? I don't know. I don't want to make that determination. It's just different from what mine was. But, you know, it's just the way things change. But this is Popo's Tales. This is the stories that I like to tell my grandkids. Maybe if I can remember a few more things to talk about, I'll do a few more. But in the meantime, I hope you haven't gotten nauseous watching out the window of my dad's station wagon as we drive through the mountains and listen to stories about Popo. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.